a dusty bank envelope, a rusted key, and a name she barely recognized anymore. When Monica Reed unlocked her late uncle's forgotten safe deposit box in downtown Atlanta, she expected old deeds or a family will. What she found was a file labeled B.A.T. Disbursement 3. Inside were check stubs, wire instructions, and a memo naming 3 Meno, now a pillar of Atlanta's civic redevelopment. It wasn't a record, it was a blueprint, and it explained exactly where $2.9 million had gone 32 years earlier. The letter arrived in a plain envelope, folded in thirds, the kind of legal correspondence that rarely means anything urgent. Monica Reed nearly tossed it with the rest of her mail bank ads, supermarket coupons, a jury summons notice from DeKalb County. But the return address caught her eye: First Peach National, Midtown Branch. Inside was a notice of dormant contents, an unclaimed safe deposit box registered to Leonard G. Hightower, deceased, her uncle. Leonard had passed nearly 2 years earlier, quietly and without a will. No children, no spouse, and few close ties left. Monica had handled the funeral arrangements, filed the paperwork, and donated most of his possessions to charity. She'd always known he was an estate attorney, semi-retired, with an impeccable memory for case law and very little interest in material things. The idea that he maintained a safe deposit box came as a surprise. Monica was 40, a compliance officer for a mid-sized Atlanta insurance firm. Fraud detection wasn't just her job, it was second nature. And yet, as she stood in the bank's privacy booth weeks later, signing the access form and watching the manager retrieve the small steel box, she expected nothing more than a few birth certificates or family keepsakes. What she found was a manila folder bound with a faded rubber band labeled in neat block letters, B.A.T. Disbursement 3. She opened it without sitting down. The first sheet was a photocopy of a check dated May 1992, payable to East Corridor Revitalization Partners, LLC, an entity she'd never heard of. Behind it, 2 more checks, both to different organizations, both dated within the same week. None of them appeared to be legitimate. Monica's eyes traced the routing numbers. The banks were real. The accounts they referenced, less so. Tucked in the back were 2 pages of handwritten notes, routing chains, currency conversion rates, and several offshore bank names she recognized from prior investigations: Belize, Liechtenstein, Cyprus. There was also a USB drive in a plastic sleeve marked BAT 1992 ledgers. She didn't open it immediately. Instead, she pulled the last page from the folder, a memo on letterhead marked internal use only, stamped with a red confidential. It referenced Category C disbursements and bore the initials of 3 former board members. One of the names leapt off the page not because she knew him personally, but because his face was still printed on construction banners downtown. He now sat on the Executive Redevelopment Board, overseeing Atlanta's most ambitious public-private housing initiative. Monica's pulse slowed, then steadied the way it always did when something didn't add up. Her uncle hadn't kept these files by accident, and someone, somewhere, had decided this was better left forgotten. But the box was open now, and the past had just re-entered the ledger. In the summer of 1991, Atlanta's skyline gleamed with construction cranes and billboards promising a new economic era. At a press conference in Centennial Olympic Park, Governor Zell Miller stepped to the podium flanked by state legislators and local business leaders. Behind them, banners proclaimed Black Advancement Trust in bold type, a partnership between the Georgia Lottery Commission and private investors. The trust was cast as a breakthrough. $8 million earmarked to support Black-owned enterprises and revitalize historically neglected neighborhoods east of downtown. News cameras panned across the crowd of community organizers and small business hopefuls. One of them, 28-year-old barbershop owner Teresa Young, recalled applying for a grant to expand her storefront on Auburn Avenue. They said the trust would bring capital where banks wouldn't, she remembered years later. In the official brochure, beneficiaries ranged from daycare centers in Mechanicsville to a printing cooperative in Summerhill. Each received initial funding directly from early lottery revenue, $5 million set aside by the state, the remainder pledged by private donors who believed in visible social impact. The trust's governance structure was designed to reassure skeptics. A 5-member board of directors, with appointees from the governor's office and Atlanta's city council, would oversee disbursements. Quarterly audits were promised, and public reports were to appear in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. It was a model of transparency, or so the legislation declared. Secretaries passed out redacted drafts of bylaws. Lawyers from the state attorney general's office reviewed conflict of interest clauses. Every document carried the seal of official approval. Inside the newly rented offices on Peachtree Street, staff set about drafting grant guidelines. Typed memos circled through fluorescent-lit cubicles, specifying that grants up to $50,000 could cover equipment purchases, payroll, or tenant improvements. The broader ambition was undeniable: show that lottery proceeds could deliver more than jackpot dreams, they could seed lasting community wealth. Yet behind closed doors, fissures began to appear. Board members bickered over budget lines. The private sector sponsor tasked with financial oversight submitted late expense reports. And in November, just 4 months after launch, a consultant's memo flagged an inconsistency. A $200,000 advance to a community outreach corporation had no formal application or recipient contact. No minute entry explained its disbursement. But as holiday decorations went up along Peachtree, public messaging remained optimistic. A December press release touted the trust's first round of approved grants, 25 small businesses across 3 districts. Local television ran profiles on a catering company in West End and a print shop in Edgewood. Even then, supporters warned that growing pains were inevitable. "This is pioneering work," one council member told the local paper. "Mistakes will be made, but the purpose endures." By early 1992, the Black Advancement Trust occupied a place in Atlanta's civic lexicon, a promise unfulfilled, yet still potent in the imaginations of those who had caught sight of it on a summer afternoon. The stage was set for greater scrutiny that would ultimately reveal how quickly the promise could unravel. By January 1992, the Black Advancement Trust's offices were shrinking in activity. The flurry of grant applications had slowed, and board meetings grew terse, convened more out of obligation than enthusiasm. Internally, staff members whispered of missing invoices and unexplained check reversals. Externally, the Trust's quarterly report, published in March, painted a picture of steady progress. $3.2 million approved in grants, dozens of new businesses aided. Yet beneath the polished numbers lay pages of redacted entries and blank signature lines. In April, a routine audit was scheduled with the state comptroller's office. The comptroller dispatched 2 junior analysts, neither of whom had worked a lottery-funded program before. They arrived with binders of ledger printouts, floppy disks, and a single magnifying glass. Their task: reconcile disbursement records against bank statements. Within days, they flagged a troubling gap. $2.9 million in disbursements bore routing numbers but no corresponding payee names. Every check stub had been rubber-stamped "void" in bold ink, yet the master ledger still listed the amounts as paid. The analysts sought clarification from the Trust's finance manager, a mild-mannered CPA named Douglas Barrett. Barrett produced a stack of handwritten worksheet, cobwebbed and water-stained, that purported to match each lump-sum disbursement with project codes. But page after page, project codes led to entries marked simply Category C, a catch-all for miscellaneous expenses. When pressed, Barrett explained that Category C funds were reserved for emergency allocations, an undefined term that none of the board minutes ever mentioned. As the audit wore on, the comptroller's team expanded its review. They contacted community recipients, Several confirmed receiving their grants, but none had documentation linking their awards to Category C. The analysts requested bank confirmations from the named payees. The banks replied that no such accounts ever existed. One junior analyst, poring over computerized backup tapes, discovered a deleted file labeled Foreign Wires DAT, last modified in September 1991. Attempts to recover it returned only fragments of code and one email header referencing offshore partner disbursement schedule. By the end of June, the auditors delivered a preliminary report to the trust board. Publicly, the board released a joint statement attributing the discrepancies to administrative overlap and disorganization, and announced the trust's immediate suspension pending organizational realignment. The press dutifully noted that the program would take a brief hiatus to improve efficiency. No mention was made of missing millions. No arrests were made. The statement concluded with assurances that all funds would be accounted for in due course. Behind closed doors, the atmosphere was more somber. Douglas Barrett resigned that afternoon, citing personal reasons. The private sector sponsor withdrew its pledged funds, and 2 board members quietly declined reappointment. By September, the trust's staff had been reassigned, its office furniture auctioned off, and its files complete with torn audit appendices in cardboard boxes and sent to state archives. The public record closed in 1993 with a final notation: Black Advancement Trust Program concluded. Further inquiries deemed unnecessary. In truth, the ledger's blank spaces spoke volumes. And in those silent voids lay the question that would remain unanswered for decades. Where had the money and accountability gone? Monica Reed rarely pondered her uncle's office. Leonard G. Pints Hightower had practiced estate law from the same faded brick building on Peachtree Street for nearly 4 decades, occupying the top floor with its sloping ceiling and dusty skylight. As a child, Monica remembered the carved oak door, the heavy brass nameplate, and the hush that fell when she crossed the threshold. Her uncle never spoke of high-profile cases or big-money disputes. Instead, he offered soft-spoken counsel on wills, trusts, and probate matters. Papers crisscrossed his desk in precise stacks, each labeled in his meticulous hand. After Leonard's death in late 2021, Monica spent an afternoon sorting through his files before donating most of them to a legal aid clinic. She noted then that his records were immaculately organized except for one unmarked drawer where she discovered a bundle of undated memos and a single ledger notebook, its pages blank past 1993. When she asked her aunt about it, she was told simply that some things weren't meant for family. Monica tucked the memory away as curiosity rather than concern. Now, standing in her apartment with the contents of the safe deposit box spread across her kitchen table, she saw those blank pages in a new light. The leather-bound notebook, its cover smooth and worn, matched her uncle's penmanship. The rubber band that held it shut was the same faded gray as the folders, and the corners of both were scuffed in identical ways. She realized the box had likely contained more than personal keepsakes. It had been a private archive, separate from client files and probate records. Monica recalled how her uncle once described lost files to her during a rare conversation. He spoke of documents misplaced during an office move in the early 90s, files that never resurfaced, though he maintained copies for critical cases. At the time, she nodded politely, imagining clerk errors or mislabeled folders. She had not imagined a deliberate cache of records connected to a state-backed fund and an unfunded promise. She laid out the photocopies of checks and the handwritten notes next to the notebook. The single-page memo marked "Confidential" felt even more pointed. The initials scrawled in the margin matched those she had found in her uncle's hand on an unrelated letterhead tucked in his old desk. It was the same looping script, the same dotting of I's and crossing of T's. Her grip tightened on the memo as she realized Leonard's files were not neutral artifacts, they were evidence of someone's silence. Her mind drifted back to late nights in the office. when she would visit him after her compliance department's closing hours. He'd pour tea from a chipped china set, while she described fraud schemes she'd uncovered. Leonard would listen without judgment, sometimes asking questions about offshore accounts or shell entities. Monica had assumed he was learning for his own peace of mind. Now she wondered if he had been gathering fragments of a puzzle that no one else saw. The streetlights flickered through her kitchen window, illuminating the spread of documents. The flash drive lay beside the notebook, its plastic sleeve cracked at one corner. As she reached for it, Monica understood the weight of her uncle's quiet diligence. He had preserved what the world wrote off as lost. And in those pages and digital files lay not only the story of missing millions, but the legacy of a lawyer who refused to let certain truths disappear. The memo's title block bore a date stamped in bold red, June 12, 1992, on-screen text overlay, internal use only, black advancement trust board packet. Beneath the header, a single sentence in typewriter font read, "Approval granted for Category C disbursements, per Board Resolution 92C3. Below it, 3 signatures looped in black ink J. Marcus Fields, Cynthia R. Dawson, and Harold L. Whitman. All 3 were original appointees to the Trust's board, each entrusted with oversight of lottery-backed grants. On the right margin, a hand-drawn arrow pointed to Category C, underlined twice in red pen. Monica leaned forward. She had seen Category A and B line items clearly defined in the Trust's bylaws. Startup grants, equipment loans, community outreach. But nowhere had she found a reference to Category C. The memo itself offered no explanation beyond miscellaneous disbursements requiring board assent. A faded post. It attached in the corner read simply, "Urgent, finalized today." She thumbed through the accompanying packet, a stapled stack of check requests. Each check stub carried the same rubber stamp, "Void reissued," followed by an original check number scrawled in pencil. The amounts varied, 125, 0, 300, 0, 610, 0 totaling nearly 2.9 million. In the ledger column marked Payee, blank space. A separate column, Category, listed only C. On-screen text overlay, Exhibit A, check register excerpt, May, June 1992, redacted. Monica opened the flash drive folder, Category C Reports, and found a single CSV file. She imported it to her laptop. Columns titled Date, Amount, Routing, Destination. There were no payee names. Instead, the destination field contained SWIFT codes for banks in Nassau, Zurich, and Guernsey. She cross-referenced one routing instruction, Nassau's SUSTX, and found it belonged to a now-defunct offshore shell named Brigham Holdings Limited. Her pulse quickened. The names on the memo were not obscure. Fields had since founded an urban redevelopment nonprofit. Dawson held a seat on a state-city joint authority. Whitman chaired an investment board for affordable housing bonds. Monica scrolled through Atlanta Business Chronicle archives. Each bore announcements praising their civic leadership. And yet, here they were, rubber, stamping millions with no paper trail. On-screen text overlay. Redacted board minutes. April 21, 1992, Section 3, C. She located the April board minutes, heavily redacted under Confidentiality Clause, Sperry 5.4. Only one line remained visible, motion to approve Category C disbursements as presented. Carried unanimously. No discussion, no list of recipients, no audit requirements. The pack of minutes concluded with an innocuous, "Meeting adjourned." It was as if the decision happened in a vacuum, sealed off from any subsequent oversight. Monica closed her eyes for a moment. Procedural safeguards existed to prevent exactly this kind of gap: the quarterly audits, the public reporting, the state comptroller's sign-off. But here, they all dissolved into a single enigmatic classification, Category C. and with it nearly $3 million disappeared into thin air. She saved her notes and lifted the folder, steadying her breath. A forensic anomaly of this magnitude could upend reputations and rewrite Atlanta's development history. The next step was clear. Trace each routing number, map each wire instruction, and uncover the hidden beneficiaries. The real story, she knew, lay buried beyond those missing audit trails waiting for the light to expose its contours. Monica sat at her dining room table as the afternoon light waned, the photocopied check stubs piled beside her laptop. Each bore the same telltale signs: faded imprint of a rubber stamp, penciled over payee lines, and a single memo scrawled in the margin, Project Beltline, or West End Acquisition. She typed the first company name into a business registry search: East Corridor Revitalization Partners, LLC, no active records. No registered agent, just a void confirmation. The entity does not exist. She moved on to Brigham Holdings Limited, the shell identified by the Nassau Swift code. A deeper internet search turned up a PDF from a 2004 real estate auction. Brigham had once owned a warehouse near Old Fourth Ward, sold off quietly after a tax lien. Beyond that, the trail went cold. Next was Southern Outreach Enterprises. A nonprofit, the records said, with a post office box in Decatur and no IRS filings after 1993. Monica's instincts bristled. These weren't mere accounting errors, they were phantom recipients. She overlaid their last known addresses on a map of Atlanta's redevelopment corridors: Auburn Avenue, Mechanicsville, the Beltline's western spur. The shell entities clustered like ghosts on silent streets. On-screen text overlay: map of phantom entities and redevelopment zones, 1990 to 1993. She cross-referenced property deeds through the county tax assessor's portal. East Corridor's warehouse was now a converted loft, part of a luxury complex marketed as historic East Side Flats. Brigham's address matched a storefront that sat vacant until 2015, when it became a pop-up gallery. Southern Outreach's post office box had changed hands twice, each time tied to small civic organizations with little financial activity. Monica's training in compliance taught her to follow the money, but here, the money never arrived to any real destination. Instead, it seeped into the city's fabricinto properties and projects that would later become symbols of Atlanta's boom. She printed the tax records and deed transfers, then highlighted the dates: 1992 for the phantom payout, 2018 for the loft conversion, 2021 for the gallery lease. A quiet timeline of misappropriation. Her heart sank as she realized the implication. Stolen lottery funds intended for community uplift had subsidized gentrification. Neighborhoods meant to receive grants instead saw rising property values and displacement. The promise of black advancement had been eroded by these silent corporate entities. Monica closed her eyes, recalling Teresa Young, the barber whose dreams of expansion once flickered under the trust's early publicity. Young's shop on Auburn Avenue now shared alleyway space with a high-end coffee bar. The physical landscape had shifted: prosperity for some, exclusion for others. The documents on her table felt heavy. Shell companies, check stubs, and routing codes were more than investigative fodder. They were clues to a deliberate scheme that reshaped real lives. She pressed her palms to her temples and considered her next move. The web of phantom entities was mapped. Now it was time to untangle who stood behind them and how the missing millions had moved from misfiled ledger lines into the streets of a city forever changed. Monica's screen glowed with spreadsheets and scanned deeds as she traced the route of laundered funds returning to Atlanta's development market. The CSV from the flash drive listed wires routed through Brigham Holdings Limited, then funneled into an account labeled Peachtree Development Fund in Zurich. On-screen text overlay: Swiss account num 84 ZHBPD 1993 transactions. The money, she realized, never vanished. It circled back as investment capital. Her next search revealed Peachtree Development Fund's 1,994 prospectus filed with Luxembourg regulators. The prospectus touted a strategic portfolio earmarked for urban revitalization in U.S. southeastern markets. Among the listed assets was a mixed-use complex on prior street land that, in 1,992, had been slated for a community center funded by the trust. Instead, it became luxury condos with ground-floor retail. Monica opened archived planning board minutes from 1,995. They showed a unanimous vote approving the Prior Street project, citing job creation and increased tax revenue. What wasn't recorded was the source of the $2.9 million seed investment. The trust's missing millions had become institutional capital. On-screen text overlay. Atlanta Planning Board Minutes, June 14, 1995, Section 4.2. She printed the project's promotional brochure, yellowed at the edges, featuring stylized renderings of wide promenades and brick facades. A red stamp on the back read, "Funded in part by Georgia Lottery proceeds." Monica held the page as if it were a confession. The brochure's fine print acknowledged anonymous private contributions, a categorization that now felt ominously precise. Her eyes drifted to a news clipping from 2019, Prior Street lofts achieve 100% occupancy, accompanied by a photo of business people sipping cappuccinos under string lights. Below, a caption noted that the complex's tax incentives had revitalized the neighborhood. Residents interviewed in the article praised the project for restoring foot traffic. No one mentioned the trust or the phantom wires. Monica overlaid timelines on her map. 1,992, 2.9 million wired offshore. 1,994, investment prospectus filed 1,995. Condo project approved 2019. Luxury units sold out. The silent streets of Mechanicsville and derelict storefronts on Prior had given way to sleek glass doors and concierge desks. Where Teresa Young's catering company might have stood, wine bars and fitness studios now crowded the sidewalks. The disbursement designed to uplift had, instead, catalyzed displacement. She leaned back and tapped her pen on the table. To expose this arc of diversion, she would need more than ledgers and brochures. She needed personal testimony, business owners who never received grants, residents priced out of their homes, and perhaps even one of the silent board members to speak on the record. Monica saved her annotated map and closed her laptop. Outside her window, the Beltline's lights blinked to life, tracing a loop around neighborhoods both prospering and persisting in tension. The trust's funds had been laundered through legal facades, then rebranded as bona fide development capital. The question now was not just who took the money, but how they used it to rewrite Atlanta's urban story and who would finally be held accountable for a promise that had been turned inside out. Monica arrived at the offices of Caston Green LLP, just as morning light filtered through tinted glass. Her contact, former colleague and compliance specialist Derek Collins, led her to a windowless conference room where a thick manila envelope waited on the oak table. Derek's expression was guarded. He'd advised caution from the start. "Something about these documents felt off," Derek said, sliding the envelope toward her. "I've taken copies, but the originals needed to go to the right people." Monica watched as he tapped the safe deposit box folder atop the pile. She handed over the USB drive containing the digitized ledgers, making sure each file name reflected its contents. Category: C, Reports, Foreign, Wires, Board, Memo. Derek inserted the drive into a secured laptop and opened the CSV. On-screen text overlay, BAT, offshore transfers, 1,991, 1,992. "I've alerted a federal financial crimes unit," Derek continued in a low voice. "Someone there will want to dig into these routing codes." Monica nodded. She knew the unit's reputation for following complex money trails and their aversion to bureaucratic delays. Derek pulled a printed cover sheet from the envelope. It bore the seal of the Department of Justice's Financial Fraud Section and a case number stamped in red, FFS 45312 ATL. Underneath, an assignment directive. Immediate review of Black Advancement Trust disbursements. Monica felt a surge of both relief and apprehension. The quiet detective work she'd conducted alone over weeks was now morphing into a formal investigation. The sealed case file marked a turning point, no longer a personal curiosity, but a matter under federal scrutiny. Over the next hour, Derek and Monica outlined key evidence: the internal memo naming board members, the shell company mappings, the property deed timelines. He took notes on a provided case worksheet, categorizing exhibits and listing potential witness interviews, former trust staff, community recipients, and any surviving board members. On-screen text overlay, exhibit list, FFS 45312 ATL. Before she left, Derek handed her a confidentiality agreement. "You'll need to preserve chain of custody," he said. No copies left on personal drives. Monica signed, mindful of the gravity. She tucked the envelope under her arm and stepped into the elevator, the doors closing behind her with a soft thud. Later that afternoon, she received a secure email from Agent Marisol Velasquez, the case's lead investigator. It thanked Monica for her proactive disclosure and requested preliminary interviews. The email signature included the DOJ crest and a direct line. Monica allowed herself a small, cautious smile. As she walked back to her car, the afternoon traffic hummed along Peachtree Street. The city's pulse felt different. Its skyscrapers and streets no longer only scenes of progress or gentrification, but stages for accountability. The first federal threads had been pulled, and even the tightest silences began to loosen. Monica's quiet discovery was becoming history in motion, and the true unraveling was only just beginning. On a humid morning in May 2023, 2 federal agents arrived at the Georgia State Archives on Capitol Avenue. Agent Marisol Velasquez and her partner, Special Investigator Daniel Lee, carried a subpoena demanding immediate access to records related to the Black Advancement Trust. They passed through silent stacks of wooden shelving, where decades-old cardboard boxes gray from dust-awaited discovery. Inside box A112, stamped BAT, year-end files. They found the bulk of the trust's official records: board minutes, quarterly reports, audited financial statements. But the box was lighter than expected. Several smaller cartons labeled audit appendices, wire transfer logs, and foreign disbursement schedules were nowhere to be found. Agent Velasquez noted this discrepancy in her notebook. On-screen text overlay, subpoena for records, U.S. District Court, Northern District of Georgia, case FFS 45312 ATL. The agents began a systematic review of the remaining contents. Velasquez thumbed through volume after volume of bound minutes, marking every reference to Category C. Lee scanned spreadsheets of grant disbursements, comparing them with Monica's flash drive data. Everywhere they looked, redacted entries and blank columns appeared where Category C funding should have been detailed. "It's like someone excised the evidence," Lee observed, tapping a ledger margin that read simply, "C Appendix." No appendices followed. They requested assistance from the archive's lead historian, Claire Montague, who guided them to a restricted wing. Behind a locked gate, she produced an inventory list from 1,994, which documented the original shipment of trust records, 27 boxes intact. But an updated 2001 inventory noted only 22. 5 boxes had vanished without explanation. On-screen text overlay, archive inventory comparison, 1,994 versus 2001. Montague recalled that in 2000, state budget cuts led to a purge of non-essential collections. She expressed regret that no detailed logs survived. "They cleared space," she said quietly. No questions asked. The agent's next step was to reconstruct what had been removed. They cross-referenced an internal archives memo discovered in Box B5 indicating that supplementary materials were repackaged and shipped to an off-site facility in Smyrna, Georgia. A fax header in the memo bore a timestamp of July 15, 2000. Velasquez faxed a copy of the memo to Smyrna's records office and issued a new subpoena. By the end of the week, 10 more cartons arrived, sealed since their departure 23 years earlier. Inside were carbon copies of wire transfer authorizations, many bearing the same Category C classification, and a tattered folder labeled Foreign Disbursements, Q4 1991. On-screen text overlay. Recovered exhibit, Foreign Disbursements, Q4 1991, folder. Back in their secure operations room, the agents reunited these newly recovered documents with Monica's originals. They discovered matching reference numbers, confirming that the missing files had indeed contained the detailed logs of the 2.9 million outflows. Every wire instruction, routing slip, and authorization signature was accounted for except for one supplementary audit report that still eluded recovery. As the agents cataloged each exhibit, they marveled at the persistence of paper trails buried, scattered, but never completely erased. In that convergence of federal power, archival oversight, and a single niece's curiosity, the trust's dark ledger was finally being restored. The investigation, dormant for 3 decades, now had the missing pieces it needed to illuminate the full scope of the betrayal. And with those pieces in hand, there was no turning back. In early 2023, as federal investigators pieced together the Black Advancement Trust's scattered records, a new thread emerged. One of the shell entities from Monica's folder Hightower West End Development LLChad resurfaced in a city procurement database. The LLC's name, nearly identical to Monica's uncle's, was likely a coincidence, but its timing and contract value raised alarms. In March 2022, the City of Atlanta had awarded Hightower West End a $5 million contract to renovate affordable housing units along Ralph David Abernathy Boulevard. On-screen text overlay. City of Atlanta Procurement Log, Contract Number C, 2022-45. Investigators requested the full bid package. What arrived were standard documents: a company profile, project timeline, references, and architect renderings. But a cover letter contained the signature of Harold L. Whitman, the same Whitman who'd signed the 1992 Category C memo. His title now read Managing Partner, a detail that bridged 3 decades. Agent Velasquez noted in her report that the bid listed initial capital provided by private investments with no further breakdown. A redacted section referenced legacy trust contributions, a phrase investigators recognized as potential code for those missing lottery funds. The renovation project's budget summary included line items, site prep, construction management, contingency totaling exactly $2.9 million. The remaining $2.1 million came from municipal bonds. On-screen text overlay. Hightower West End bid summary, excerpt. Special Investigator Lee tracked down the project architect, who recalled visiting the construction site in May 2022. He described workers uncovering old foundation footings from a 1920s housing block, but nothing about lottery proceeds or federal audits. "I never asked," the architect admitted. "Contractors just showed up with funding letters and started work." Monica recognized the irony. A trust created to uplift West End's residents had, through an offshore detour, financed its own redevelopment tone priced out of reach for many original communities. Investigators matched bank transfer records from Hightower West End's operating account to the Swiss routing codes on Monica's CSV. A 1.45 million wire had arrived in Zurich in June 1992, then re-entered the U.S. account in May 2022. The cycle of money laundering had completed itself in reverse. On-screen text overlay, wire transfer chain diagram, 1992 to 2022. When confronted, Whitman claimed no memory of the 1,992 disbursements, insisting he'd joined Hightower West End only in 2018. But his signature's handwriting characteristics flourished capitals. Distinctive loops matched both the Board Resolution 92C3 memo and the 2022 bid cover letter. A forensic handwriting expert confirmed a high probability match. By late 2023, subpoenas had been served to Hightower West End's corporate officers and to the City of Atlanta's Procurement Division. The investigation opened a new line of inquiry. Did municipal staff overlook a conflict of interest or intentionally obscure the origin of private funds? The construction contract, once a routine city project, had become a living testament to the trust's lost millions and a stark example of how stolen public money could be recycled into legitimate civic work. As Monica reviewed the procurement documents, she felt the weight of systemic oversight failures. A promise meant to build community infrastructure had been redirected into projects that eclipsed the needs of those same communities. And within the inked lines of a city contract lay proof that the stolen funds were still reshaping Atlanta only, now under the guise of progress. Monica sat before the leather-bound notebook recovered from her uncle's safe deposit box, its crisp pages now filled with transcriptions of dozens of letters exchanged in 1,992 and 1,993. She had painstakingly digitized each envelope seal, handwritten salutation, and closing flourish, everything bearing Leonard Hightower's familiar looping script. On-screen text overlay. Exhibit B, Correspondence Log, Leonard G. Hightower Files, 1990. 2. 1993. The earliest letter, dated August 5, 1992, bore no official letterhead, only a smudged return address. C. O. Georgia Lottery Commission, Atlanta, GA. Inside, a typed note read, "Dear Mr. Hightower, we appreciate your assistance with the disbursement records reconciliation. Please retain all draft spreadsheets in their original form. Audited versions will follow when the Category C summary is complete. Sincerely, D.M." No surname, just initials. Monica recognized D.M. from a faded post-it in her folder. The compliance officer assigned to oversee supplementary disbursements. The letter implied Leonard had direct access to draft data long before the board's final sign-off. Another letter, November 17, 1992, was written on his personal stationery. In neat script, Leonard thanked a colleague identified only by the signature, Cynthia, for forwarding a file marked Foreign Disbursement Schedule Q4. He noted, "I have reviewed the enclosed routing codes and will cross-verify them with the Trust's general ledger. Let me know if there are discrepancies beyond the projected variance of 2.3%. Leonard's tone was professional, even clinical, suggesting he viewed the work as a technical exercise. Yet the choice to store these unredacted drafts in his private notebook hinted at caution and instinct to preserve evidence beyond official channels. The most revealing piece was a short, handwritten note penned on the back of a canceled check, the stub for a $300 draft to an unknown payee. The note read simply, "Board to sign off on 11/21. Keep this with my client files. L." That date matched the board minutes Monica had uncovered, where the discussion of Category C was conspicuously absent. It was as though Leonard anticipated an omission and took measures to document the moment himself. On-screen text overlay. Handwritten note excerpt on check stub, dated 11/17/1992. Monica paused over a final letter, undated but found between the notebook's pages. Addressed, To whom it may concern, it stated, quote, should the need arise, these files serve as a record of disbursements not captured in public reports. I am maintaining them to ensure any future audit can proceed unimpeded. LGH. The language struck Monica. It was more than a lawyer's procedural foresight, it was a warning. Leonard had foreseen the gaps in the public record and deliberately safeguarded the raw data. These were not estate documents. They were a ledger of justice deferred. As autumn dusk settled beyond her window, Monica traced Leonard's script with her finger, imagining the quiet hours he spent copying files, drafting letters, and preserving the trust's hidden truth. The whispers in those old letters spoke of a man unwilling to let institutional silence swallow the missing millions entirely. And in that conviction lay the key to unlocking a legacy of accountability, one carefully inscribed in the margin of history. Monica sat before her laptop in the waning glow of an autumn evening, the flash drive labeled BAT 1992 ledgers plugged into a USB hub beside her. She navigated past folder names in all caps: Category C, Reports, Foreign, Wires, Board, Memosand, opened the largest file, Master Ledger, 1993 CSV. On-screen text overlay, Master Ledger, Black Advancement Trust Disbursements, 1993. Columns stretched across her screen. Date, check, amount, category, routing, destination, notes. The Category C, entries 32, in total lined up back to back, each tagged with precise timestamps from May through June 1992. The notes field stood empty for everyone. Monica copied the Category C block into a new worksheet and highlighted the matching routing entries in crimson. Switching tabs, she opened the Foreign Wires folder. Each wire record paired a Category C check number with an offshore SWIFT code. On-screen text overlay. Foreign Wire Instructions, Q2 1992. She exported both datasets to her compliance software and ran a join on check. An automated match confirmed all Category C entries had corresponding wires. The money trail was complete, at least in digital form. Her mind traced each node. Checks printed in Atlanta, processed through domestic banks, routed offshore, then reinvested under aliases. She toggled to a pivot table, summarizing destinations. 1.2 million to Nassau, 950, 0 to Zurich, 740, 0 to Guernsey. The totals reconciled exactly to the missing 2.9 million. There was no plausible explanation other than deliberate concealment. Monica exported the pivot table to PDF and printed it on her office printer. She placed the printout on an old drafting board alongside her notes. The flash drive's plastic sleeve rattled as she removed it, revealing a second drive labeled Ledger Metadata. Inside was a text file. Generated by JRB on 7/10/92, version 1.42. A timestamp far earlier than the Trust's published ledger updates proof the silent files predated any official documentation. On-screen text overlay, metadata file, Master Ledger, version history. Her pulse ticked with quiet exhilaration. The metadata file confirmed Leonard's internal copies were not mere backups. They were primary records created before obfuscation began. Whoever, whether the finance manager or an unnamed compliance officer, prepared the public ledger that appeared in March 1992 had already excised the Category C entries. Monica saved the metadata text and backed up her entire folder to an encrypted drive reserved for the DOJ. With the ledger's digital anatomy fully revealed, she drafted an email to Agent Velasquez. In clear, concise bullet points, she outlined the matching of Category C checks to offshore wires, the pivot table totals, and the metadata's implications. She attached the PDF export and a screenshot of the CSV join. In the subject line, she wrote, FFS 45,312 ATL, master ledger analysis completed. As the email uploaded, Monica closed her eyes, imagining the dominoes about to fall in courtrooms and council chambers. The flash drive once, a forgotten artifact in a dusty box, had become the key to a financial ledger long thought irretrievable. Tomorrow, the investigators would have the evidence in hand, ready to confront the names inked on that Category C memo. And in that confrontation, the ledger's silence would finally be broken. In a wood-paneled conference room, a few blocks from the State Archives, Agent Marisol Velasquez convened a group of former trust staff members under oath. Around the oval table sat the trust's original grant coordinator, two junior analysts from the 1992 audit, and a retired comptroller's aide. Their faces bore the quiet apprehension of recalling long-buried duties. Velasquez began by laying out the recovered exhibits: the Category C memo, the master ledger files, and the foreign wire instructions. She noted how these documents had lain hidden, mislabeled, and dispersed for 3 decades. Then she asked the first question: what discussions, if any, took place regarding unaccounted disbursements? The grant coordinator, now in her late 70s, adjusted her glasses. We all assumed Category C was simply a line for incidental expenses, things like staff travel or printing corrections. We never saw the detailed logs, she said softly. Her voice trembled at the memory of signing off on blank forms. A junior analyst spoke next, recalling that the audit team had flagged Category C but was instructed by senior management to focus on approved grants first. He admitted that follow-up requests for documentation were politely ignored, and the software tapes containing transaction backups disappeared after being brought to a director's attention. The retired aide, pen hovering above her notepad, admitted she'd once reviewed a draft audit report that included detailed Category C entries, only to have the pages redacted before publication. "I thought it was clerical error," she whispered. When they sent the final report, the pages were simply gone. Throughout, Velasquez listened without interruption, charting each admission on a dry erase board. Beside her, Special Investigator Daniel Lee underlined key dates: July 1992 for the initial audit findings, and March 1993 when the public report omitted all Category C references. On-screen text overlay. Timeline of audit reviews and redactions: 1992, 1993. By the end of the session, a pattern emerged. Well-intentioned staff who trusted institutional leadership, junior auditors discouraged from probing further, and deliberate suppression of evidence, all converging to hide the true path of the trust's funds. As the witnesses were dismissed, Velasquez paused over the grant coordinator's trembling shoulders. "Your testimony shows these disbursements were never meant to vanish," she said. "They were buried, but not gone." Outside the conference room, Atlanta's afternoon light slanted across the lobby. The city's bustle held no trace of the meeting, within no sign that the trust's silent emptiness was finally being filled. But for the first time in 30 years, the truth of the Black Advancement Trust was fully on record, anchored by those who had watched it slip away. And in that anchoring, the shadows of past omissions would begin to clear, one confession at a time. Agent Velasquez reviewed the profile of J. Marcus Fields one last time before dialing his office number. Fields, once a modest community organizer, now presided over the Beltline Redevelopment Authority, an influential post shaping Atlanta's largest public-private urban project. His polished LinkedIn page touted inclusive growth, yet in the federal case file, his name was inked next to Category C Disbursement Authorization, June 12, 1992. On-screen text overlay. Board Resolution 92C3 signatures, replica. When Fields arrived at the Atlanta Federal Building, he moved through the lobby with practiced calm. His tailored suit and composed smile contrasted with the gravity of the summons. In the interview room, Velasquez presented two documents side by side: The 1,992 memo bearing his original signature and a 2022 Beltline Authority bid letter, also signed by him. A forensic handwriting analysis report certified 3 days earlier rested between them. "Mr. Fields," Velasquez said, "these signatures are your own. The question is why you approved $2.9 million in unaccounted disbursements, then oversaw projects funded by those same diverted funds 3 decades later." Fields leaned back. His gaze flicked to the framed photograph on the wall. Him, smiling beside Governor Miller at the Trust's launch event. He cleared his throat. "I do not recall any Category C designation," he began, voice measured. "I attended that meeting, but the materials were extensive. My focus was community input, not financial minutia." On-screen text overlay. April 21, 1992 Board Minutes, redacted. Velasquez placed the redacted minutes in front of him. Only one line remained visible. Motion carried unanimously, with his signature block intact. "No discussion, no audit note," she observed. "And yet, the ledger shows you signed off." Fields' posture stiffened. He retrieved a folder from his briefcase, a bound copy of his Beltline Authority Code of Ethics. "My record in public service demonstrates my commitment to transparency," he said. "If errors occurred, they were oversights by finance staff, not deliberate acts by me." Special Investigator Lee interjected. "Oversight that redirected nearly $3 million offshore and resurfaced in your projects?" He tapped the wire transfer diagram. On-screen text overlay. Wire transfer chain diagram. 1,992 to 2022. Fields swallowed. "I hired third-party auditors for the Beltline contracts," he said. "If funds came from questionable sources, I was never informed." His voice wavered for the first time. Velasquez closed her notebook. "Mr. Fields, you held a duty to inquire. Signing a confidential memo authorizing miscellaneous disbursements carries responsibility. Today, you have the chance to clarify your role." Fields paused, eyes on his folded hands. The quiet tension in the room mirrored the silence that had shrouded the Trust for decades. Outside, the afternoon sun slanted across the streets that his projects now defined. He exhaled. "I understand the gravity," he said softly. "I will cooperate fully." As Fields agreed to provide emails and meeting notes, Velasquez allowed herself a brief nod. One of the Trust's most prominent names had been confronted and could no longer hide behind redactions. In that moment of accountability, the Beltline's future governance and the Trust's buried past finally shared common ground. Across Atlanta's east side, the echo of the Black Advancement Trust's unmet promise lingered in empty storefronts and cracked sidewalks. Teresa Young's barber shop on Auburn Avenue stood as a quiet emblem. Once poised for expansion, it never received the anticipated grant, its neon sign blinking half-lit for years. On-screen text overlay. Auburn Avenue, 1993 versus 2023. Photographic comparison. In Mechanicsville, the community center that should have risen on the site of a boarded-up theater remained a foundation of rubble and overgrown weeds. Residents recalled neighborhood meetings where the Trust's name was spoken with hope, only to fade into discussion of funding complications and administrative delays. Those euphemisms masked the truth that $2.9 million had evaporated into offshore accounts rather than empower local entrepreneurs or renovate historic blocks. Monica drove past the old print shop on Edgewood Avenue, a brick building now subdivided into high-end lofts, and thought of the cooperative that had submitted a detailed business plan in June 1992, only to be told their application was lost. On-screen text overlay. Archived grant application, Edgewood Printing Cooperative, June 1992, excerpt. The cooperative's founders, now scattered and retired, never received an apology or explanation. Instead, the building's original signage was painted over, replaced with polished glass and stainless steel. The human cost of administrative silence became clear in census data. Between 1990 and 2020, several predominantly black neighborhoods saw median household income stagnate or decline, even as property values soared in adjacent districts. Where the trust aimed to sow economic seeds, land speculators and luxury developers harvested burgeoning profits. The result was a form of displacement, more insidious than eviction notice, an erosion of community fabric through lost opportunity. Interviews with longtime residents revealed stories of small business owners who pivoted careers when promised capital never arrived. One daycare operator on Memorial Drive closed her doors in 1994, citing inability to meet rising insurance and maintenance costs. A catering collective that had hoped to secure kitchen equipment had to dissolve by 1993. Their catalogs of menus and client interest formed dusty archives in personal attics, reminders of what might have been. On-screen text overlay. Community Impact Snapshot. Grant applications versus actual awards. 1,992, 1,993. Even local nonprofits felt the pinch. Organizations providing job training and financial literacy workshops had anticipated partnership with the Trust's outreach program. Without those resources, they scaled back services, leaving gaps in mentorship and seed capital that could have launched dozens of micro-enterprises. The silence of missing audits became a vacuum in which community growth stalled. As Monica reflected on these cumulative losses, she recognized that uncovering the diverted millions was only half the battle. True resolution required more than indictments. It demanded restorative measures for those communities left bereft. The cost of silence was not measured in redacted pages alone, but in the quiet dissolution of dreams and the shadows it cast over Atlanta's promise of equitable progress. By spring 2024, the federal case FFS 45312 ATL had unfolded in hearings that drew subdued headlines across Atlanta. Indictments were returned against 3 surviving board members, Fields, Dawson, and Whitman, charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and money laundering. Plea agreements from Dawson and Whitman provided critical admissions. They acknowledged authorizing Category C disbursements without oversight and routing funds through offshore accounts. Fields, asserting limited recall, faced trial on counts of willful misprision of felony and falsification of records. On-screen text overlay. U.S. District Court, Northern District of Georgia, case status, April 2024. In parallel, the City of Atlanta launched a restitution program for businesses that had applied to the trust between 1991 and 1993. Eligible applicants received grants equal to the amounts they'd requested, up to $50,000 each, in priority access to new economic development loans. Monica aided the city's compliance office by providing the reconstructed ledger data, enabling officials to match applicants' names with the original Category A and B filings. One afternoon in June, she attended a ceremony at City Hall where Teresa Young, now owner of a thriving beauty collective, received a restored grant check for $45,000. Young's voice quavered as she thanked the crowd, recalling how she once watched her expansion dreams slip away like sand. Tears of vindication mingled with applause, and Monica felt the ledger's weight lift, if only slightly. Legally, the trial of J. Marcus Fields began in September 2024. Over 4 days of testimony, prosecutors introduced the internal memo, the foreign wire records, and forensic handwriting analysis. Fields conceded he'd signed the Category C resolution, but insisted he believed he was approving discretionary outreach funds. The jury, however, found him guilty of falsifying public documents. Sentencing was set for early 2025, with potential prison terms and asset forfeiture that could recover additional funds for restitution. Emotionally, Monica found herself unmoored by the intensity of rediscovery. She had unlocked a box of forgotten documents but also opened wounds in neighborhoods long shaped by absence. In quiet moments, she revisited her uncle's final notice insistence that these files serve as a record of disbursements not captured in public reports. Leonard Hightower's foresight had guided the investigation, but Monica carried the burden of translating that record into tangible justice. As 2025 dawned, Atlanta's landscape bore subtle shifts. On Auburn Avenue, storefronts once dark, now displayed, restored by B.A.T. Legacy Fund. Along the Beltline, new murals commissioned through restitution grants celebrated local entrepreneurs who might otherwise have been displaced. The physical traces of misappropriation were fading, replaced by signs of community resurgence. Monica stood before the unlocked safety deposit box for the final time, her fingers brushing the embossed letters on the folder. B.A.T. Disbursement 3. The box would return to the vault, its secrets preserved in federal archives, but its contents had altered Atlanta's course. A vanished $2.9 million had resurfaced, not just on spreadsheets but in renewed hope. And though the ledger was closed, its echoes would reverberate in every revitalized block and every amplified voice, a testament to the truth that silence can never fully swallow.